The HOA president stood in my nursery at 3 a.m., violently shaking my baby's crib. My 3-month-old screamed in terror as the structure rocked beneath her. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Then I heard sirens outside. Her face went pale. Justice was finally coming. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The baby monitor's screen flickered at 2:47 a.m., jolting me awake from restless sleep. My heart slammed against my ribs as I squinted at the grainy green tinted image, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Someone was in Emma's room. Not just near her room. Not standing in the hallway or peeking through a window. Actually inside her nursery. A figure stood over my 3-month-old daughter's crib, hands gripping the wooden rails with disturbing intensity. Even through the monitor's poor resolution and the darkness of the room, I recognized that silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun, those rigid shoulders that seemed to carry perpetual judgment and disapproval. Linda Hutcherson. Pinewood Grove HOA president. The woman who'd made our lives a living nightmare since we'd moved into this supposedly family-friendly neighborhood 6 months ago, when I was 7 months pregnant with Emma. Daniel. I shook my husband awake, my voice strangled with pure terror. Daniel, wake up. Someone's in Emma's room. Someone's with the baby. He bolted upright, instantly alert despite the exhaustion that had become our constant companion. We'd both been surviving on fragments of sleep since Emma arrived, endless colicky nights, round-the-clock feeding schedules, the bone-deep weariness that comes with new parenthood. But raw fear burned through fatigue like lightning through fog. We ran down the hallway together, our bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Daniel reached the nursery first, throwing the door open with such force that it slammed against the wall with a bang that should have woken the entire neighborhood. The scene before us defied all comprehension, all logic, all sense of reality. Linda Hutcherson stood with her hands still wrapped around Emma's crib rails, actually shaking the entire structure with deliberate force. The mobile above, handcrafted by my late mother during her final months of life, delicate glass butterflies that caught light like suspended rainbows, swung violently back and forth. Emma's piercing screams filled the room, her tiny face purple with distress, her newborn fists clenched tight as her whole world literally shook around her. What the hell are you doing? Daniel's roar made Linda jump, but she didn't immediately release the crib. I rushed past him, my hands reaching for Emma, scooping her up from the shaking crib. Her little body trembled uncontrollably, overheated from crying, her newborn skin flushed and damp with sweat. "Shoo, baby, mommy's here," I whispered desperately, but my own voice shook with barely controlled rage and complete disbelief. Linda smoothed her cardigan with deliberate, calculated calm, as though she'd been caught doing nothing more offensive than rearranging furniture without permission. She pulled a measuring tape from her pocket with practiced efficiency. "This crib violates HOA regulations," she announced in that clipped, superior tone that made my blood boil. Section 7.3, subsection B clearly states that all nursery furniture must be positioned at least 18 inches from exterior walls to prevent potential noise transmission to neighboring properties. My mouth fell open in shock. "You broke into my house in the middle of the night to measure my baby's crib?" "I didn't break in." Linda's thin lips pressed into a line of self-righteous smugness that I'd come to despise over the past months. "I used the emergency master key that all HOA board members possess for situations exactly like this. As president, I have the legal authority to conduct spot inspections for compliance violations. It's all clearly outlined in the covenant." At 3 a.m. Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his whole body vibrating with barely restrained fury. "You terrified our daughter. You could have." He stopped abruptly, his face going pale as a terrible realization dawned. "How long have you been doing this? Have you been in our house before when we were sleeping?" Something flickered across Linda's face, not guilt or shame, but irritation at being questioned, at having her authority challenged. "The HOA covenant grants me inspection rights at any time I deem necessary. If you'd simply followed the rules from the beginning, none of this would be happening." But you people. Get out. The words tore from my throat with such volcanic force that Emma startled in my arms, her exhausted cries intensifying again. Get out of my house right now before I call the police and have you arrested for breaking and entering. Linda's cold eyes narrowed dangerously. I am following proper procedure, Mrs. Ahmed. It's you who insists on defying community standards at every turn. First the mailbox you painted that garish blue instead of regulation black. Then those tacky wind chimes on your porch that exceed the noise ordinance by at least 15 decibels, now this. She gestured at the crib with barely concealed contempt dripping from every word. You people seem to think rules don't apply to you. You people. Daniel stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. What exactly do you mean by, you people, Linda? I knew exactly what she meant. We'd known from the very first day we moved in, when Linda had shown up on our doorstep with her clipboard and forced smile, asking pointed questions about where we were originally from and how we'd ended up in Pinewood Grove. Daniel was Mexican-American, with warm brown skin and his grandmother's surname, Cortez. My last name was Ahmed, and my hijab had been the first thing Linda's disapproving gaze had fixed on, studying it like it was some kind of threat or violation. I'm calling the police right now. I shifted Emma to one arm and pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. Go ahead, Linda said with chilling coolness, her confidence absolute. And I'll file formal complaints for all 17 documented HOA violations you've accumulated in just 6 months. That's grounds for foreclosure proceedings under our covenant. You'll lose this house, your investment, everything. My finger hovered over 911, trembling. Emma's cries were weakening now, not calming, but the heartbreaking exhausted whimpers of a baby who'd screamed herself completely hoarse. 17 violations. Could Linda really take our home? We'd saved for 5 grueling years for the down payment on this house. It was supposed to be Emma's childhood home, the place where she'd take her first steps, lose her first tooth, learn to ride a bike, come home to after school every day. Daniel's warm hand covered mine, steadying it. Call them, Sarah. She broke into our house and terrorized our infant daughter. I don't care what she threatens. This ends tonight. I pressed the button. Officer Marcus Johnson arrived within 12 minutes, his patrol car's lights painting urgent blue and red streaks across our dark neighborhood. Officer Rachel Chen pulled up right behind him in a second patrol car. I watched from the living room window as lights flickered on in neighboring houses up and down the street, curtains twitching nervously, faces peering out to witness the drama. Linda stood on our porch in the cool night air, utterly composed and collected, her designer purse over her shoulder as if she'd simply stopped by for afternoon tea. Officers, she greeted them with practiced warmth and that political smile. Thank goodness you're here. These homeowners have been systematically violating community regulations for months, and when I attempted to address the situation properly, they became hostile, aggressive, and threatening toward me. My blood went from hot to absolutely boiling. She broke into my house and shook my baby's crib. Officer Johnson raised his hand calmly, his dark eyes taking in the entire scene with careful, trained assessment. Ma'am, I need everyone to calm down and take a breath. Let's go through this step by step. He looked directly at Linda. Ms. Hutcherson. Linda Hutcherson. I'm the HOA president of Pinewood Grove. She drew herself up proudly. I've served this community faithfully for 12 years, maintaining property values and ensuring neighborhood standards are consistently upheld for everyone's benefit. And you entered this residence how, exactly? Linda produced a key from her pocket with an almost theatrical flourish. All board members are provided with master keys for emergency access and compliance inspections. It's clearly stated in the covenant that every homeowner signs upon purchase. She turned to us with mock sympathy that made my stomach churn. Perhaps you should have read the documents more carefully before purchasing property here. Officer Chen was writing detailed notes, her expression professionally neutral. And what was the purpose of tonight's visit? Routine compliance inspection. I've documented multiple serious violations from this property over recent months, and I needed to personally verify the interior violations before filing formal complaints with the board. At 2:47 in the morning, I clutched Emma tighter against my chest. She'd finally fallen into exhausted sleep, her small breaths warm and rapid on my collarbone. She was literally shaking my baby's crib with my 3-month-old daughter in it. Look at the monitor footage, we have the entire incident recorded. Both officers' expressions changed immediately. Officer Johnson's jaw tightened visibly. You have video documentation of this incident? Daniel already had his phone out, fingers flying as he pulled up the baby monitor's cloud-recorded footage. We huddled around the small screen, watching the grainy video replay in sick silence. Linda's figure entering the dark nursery, moving directly to the crib with purpose, gripping the wooden rails with both hands. The deliberate shaking motion, the mobile swinging wildly above, and then, most damning of all, Emma's tiny form clearly visible in the crib, her little arms jerking helplessly as the structure moved beneath her. The audio captured her escalating screams, growing more desperate and terrified with each passing second. "That's assault on a minor," Officer Chen said quietly, her voice hard as steel. Her eyes, when they turned to Linda, held absolute ice. "You physically shook a structure containing an infant. Do you understand how incredibly dangerous that is? Babies have died from far less force than what we're seeing here." Linda's careful composure finally cracked at the edges. No, that's not, I was simply testing the structural integrity of the crib. It appeared unstable and potentially dangerous. I was genuinely concerned for the child's immediate safety." "Then you should have knocked on the door like a normal person and expressed those concerns directly to the parents," Officer Johnson said firmly. He pulled handcuffs from his belt, and my knees went weak with relief and shock. "Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for criminal trespass, assault on a minor, reckless endangerment of a child, and abuse of authority. This is absolutely absurd." Linda's voice rose to an unhinged shriek as Officer Chen guided her arms behind her back with practiced efficiency. "I have authority here. I'm protecting this neighborhood from people who don't respect, these people don't belong. Ma'am, you need to stop talking immediately." Officer Johnson's voice was firm but not unkind. "Anything you say from this point forward can and will be used against you in a court of law." As they led her toward the patrol car, Linda twisted back violently, her face contorted with pure fury and hatred. "You'll regret this. I'll have you evicted. I'll make sure you never feel safe here. This neighborhood was perfect before your kind." The patrol car door closed with finality, cutting off her venomous threats. "We didn't sleep at all that night. How could we?" Daniel carefully moved Emma's crib into our bedroom while I filed police reports, answered endless questions, and tried to process the surreal nightmare we just lived through. Officer Chen had been particularly thorough, taking dozens of photos of everything, the crib from multiple angles, the mobile, the lock on our front door that Linda had violated with her master key, even the measuring tape she'd dropped. "Has she done things like this before?" Officer Chen had asked seriously. "Any other signs of harassment or targeted behavior?" I'd laughed, a bitter, broken sound that startled Emma awake and made Daniel immediately reach for my hand. Where do I even start? The list was devastatingly long. Linda had fined us $50 for our mailbox being non-regulation blue, when we painted it a cheerful sky blue to match Emma's nursery theme during my nesting phase. She'd issued formal citations for Daniel's work truck being parked in our own driveway. Commercial vehicles were apparently strictly forbidden, though our white neighbor 3 houses down had a massive contractor van with company logos that Linda walked past daily without a single comment. There was the time she'd called code enforcement on us for suspicious activity, when my younger brother visited for a weekend, claiming his car exceeded the guest parking time limit. The formal written complaint about our overwhelming ethnic cooking odors, after I'd made my mother's traditional biryani recipe to share with neighbors. The aggressive demand that we immediately remove the small decorative fountain in our backyard because the gentle water sounds disturbed the neighborhood peace, even though the Hardings 2 doors down had an elaborate koi pond with an actual waterfall feature that ran 24/7. But it was the incident with Daniel's grandmother's wind chimes that had truly revealed Linda's cruel nature. Daniel's beloved grandmother, Abuela Rosa, had died just 3 months before Emma was born. She'd raised him single-handedly after his parents passed away in a devastating car accident when he was only 7 years old. She'd been our rock throughout my difficult pregnancy, constantly knitting tiny blankets, cooking nutritious meals, telling Daniel beautiful stories about his parents so Emma would know where she came from. At Abuela Rosa's funeral, Daniel's aunt had given him her wind chimes, delicate copper tubes that sang softly in the breeze, inscribed with lines from a Neruda poem Abuela had loved deeply. Daniel had hung them on our front porch, finding profound comfort in their gentle music that reminded him of childhood visits to her small house. Linda had them forcibly removed within a single week, citing noise violation ordinances. When Daniel tried to explain their deep sentimental significance, tried to show her the inscription, she'd actually smiled, that thin, cruel smile that haunted my nightmares, and said coldly, "Sentimental value doesn't supersede community standards, Mr. Cortez. Rules apply to everyone equally." He'd been too heartbroken, too grief-stricken to fight her. "Document absolutely everything from now on," Officer Chen had advised before finally leaving as dawn broke. "Every email, every fine, every interaction, every encounter. Build a detailed timeline with dates and evidence. Because this is going to get very complicated, and you'll need proof of a pattern." She was absolutely right. The story hit local news within 24 hours. HOA president arrested after breaking into home, allegedly shaking infant's crib, ran the headline on Channel 7's morning broadcast. My phone exploded with messages, concerned friends, curious acquaintances, distant relatives, reporters desperately requesting exclusive interviews. My mother called from across the country, her voice shaking with rage and fear. "Sarah, Beta, are you okay? Is my grandbaby safe? Should I fly out there immediately? I can be on a plane in 2 hours. We're okay, Mom. I promise we're safe." I bounced Emma gently as I talked, my free hand clutching coffee that had gone stone cold hours ago. The police took it very seriously. Linda's actually being charged with real crimes. She can't hurt us anymore. That evil woman, my mother's accent thickened with pure emotion. How dare she touch my granddaughter? How dare she enter your home like a thief in the night and terrorize a helpless baby? After I hung up, Daniel appeared in the doorway, his laptop tucked under his arm and a strange expression on his exhausted face. "Sarah, you need to see this right now." He'd found Pinewood Grove's online neighborhood forum, and it was exploding with activity. Truth Seeker 2024, anyone else think it's incredibly suspicious how Sarah and Daniel moved in and suddenly there are all these constant complaints? Linda's been specifically targeting them from day one. I've watched it happen. Concerned citizen, I saw Linda measuring their fence last month with a ladder. She was literally climbing it. Who does that? What was she looking for? Pinewood Mom, my heart absolutely breaks for that poor baby. I heard her crying through the monitor footage on the news. What if Sarah and Daniel hadn't woken up in time? What if Linda had actually taken her? Was that her plan? That horrifying thought had been haunting me constantly. What had Linda actually planned? Just a simple measurement for her violation records, or something far, far worse? But other comments were significantly less supportive. Property values 1st, while I agree Linda's methods were extreme and inappropriate, she's not entirely wrong about the violations. Rules exist for good reasons. Everyone thinks they're special and above the law. Neighborhood Watch, I'm sorry, but that crib genuinely was positioned too close to the wall. I can hear that baby crying at night through my bedroom wall. Linda was technically protecting my property value. Anonymous, this wouldn't even be news if certain people didn't immediately play the victim card every single time they're held accountable for breaking rules. I slammed the laptop shut, feeling physically sick. "Don't read the comments section," Daniel said softly, pulling me close. "Never, ever read the comments." But it was impossible not to when our doorbell rang late that afternoon, and I found our neighbor from directly across the street, Patricia Morrison, a grandmother in her 60s with kind eyes and graying hair, standing on the porch holding a warm casserole dish. "I wanted to apologize properly," she said, her voice trembling as she refused to meet my gaze. "I knew Linda was specifically targeting you both. We all knew. Everyone on this street knew exactly what she was doing. And none of us said a single word because..." She trailed off painfully, finally looking up with tears in her eyes. "Because it was easier not to get involved. Because she controlled the entire HOA board with an iron fist, and openly crossing her meant becoming her next target. But what she did to your precious baby," her voice cracked completely. "I have 3 grandchildren of my own. The thought of someone doing that to any of them. I'm so deeply sorry. We all should have stood up for you from the beginning." More neighbors came throughout the week. Some brought food, others just came to apologize or share their own painful stories of Linda's systematic harassment. We slowly learned we weren't her first targets, just her most recent and most dramatic. The Hendersons had been fined literally thousands of dollars for an oak tree that grew exactly 2 inches past the approved height limit. The Patels faced actual foreclosure threats over their beautiful Diwali decorations. A retired veteran on a fixed income had been cited for displaying his American flag on a day that wasn't a designated federal holiday. Linda had ruled Pinewood Grove through pure fear and financial intimidation for over a decade, and we'd somehow become the catalyst that finally shattered her power. The criminal court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Our lawyer, Marcus Webb, an experienced black man in his 50s who specialized in civil rights and discrimination cases, had taken our case completely pro bono after seeing the widespread news coverage and being moved by our story. "This isn't just about a straightforward criminal case," he'd explained seriously at our first meeting in his downtown office. "This is about systematic harassment, clear discrimination, deliberate abuse of power, and institutional failure. We're going after the entire HOA structure, too. They knowingly enabled Linda's behavior for years." The day of the hearing arrived cold and gray, with early autumn rain pattering steadily against the courthouse's tall windows. Emma was staying with my mother, who'd flown out immediately to help us through this nightmare. I was profoundly grateful Emma didn't have to be in that tense courtroom, even though part of me wanted the judge to see her, to see exactly what Linda had terrorized. Linda sat rigidly at the defense table with her expensive lawyer, her expression carved from stone. She'd aged noticeably in 3 weeks, with lines deepening around her mouth and eyes, but her spine remained absolutely rigid with defiance. The prosecution played the baby monitor footage on large screens. In the silent, packed courtroom, Emma's terrified cries echoed from the speakers with heartbreaking clarity, and I watched several people in the crowded gallery physically flinch. One woman, a potential juror, pressed her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Then came the parade of testimonies. Patricia Morrison described years of Linda's calculated harassment in detail. She ruled through fear, intimidation, and crushing fines, Patricia said steadily. Anyone who dared question her authority was immediately targeted for destruction. She weaponized the HOA covenant against families. The Patels testified about blatant religious discrimination. The Hendersons about financial abuse and targeted enforcement. One after another, neighbors stepped forward with stories that painted an absolutely damning picture of Linda's tyrannical reign. When it was finally my turn, I walked to the witness stand with trembling legs. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Sarah Chen, no relation to Officer Chen, though both women shared the same core of steel, guided me carefully through that traumatic night. "Mrs. Ahmed Cortez, can you describe what you felt when you first saw the defendant in your daughter's room?" "Pure terror." My voice broke immediately. "Absolute, primal terror. I thought someone was going to hurt my baby. Or kidnap her. You hear stories constantly, home invasions, kidnappings, attacks, and in that frozen moment, I genuinely believed I was living one. I looked directly at Linda, forcing myself to meet her cold eyes. And then to realize it was our HOA president, someone who was supposed to serve and protect our community, using her trusted power to break into our home and deliberately endanger our helpless child. It was a betrayal I still can't fully process. Has the defendant's behavior affected your family's daily well-being? We can't sleep anymore. I check the baby monitor obsessively, constantly, every few minutes. Daniel installed completely new locks, multiple security cameras, a sophisticated alarm system. Emma, my voice cracked again. Emma still wakes up screaming sometimes, even though she's far too young to consciously remember. Our pediatrician says babies absolutely sense trauma, that it affects their neurological development in measurable ways. Tears streamed freely down my face. Linda didn't just scare us that one night. She's permanently stolen our fundamental sense of safety in our own home. Linda's expensive lawyer tried desperately to argue that it was a tragic misunderstanding, that Linda had been genuinely concerned about legitimate safety violations, that her intentions were pure even if her methods were admittedly flawed and poorly timed. Your Honor, Marcus Webb countered powerfully during his closing argument, intentions become completely irrelevant when those actions directly result in breaking into a private home at nearly 3 a.m. and physically shaking an infant's crib. The defendant held a position of enormous trust and community authority, which she systematically abused to harass, discriminate against, and ultimately physically assault a 3-month-old baby. This wasn't an innocent mistake or poor judgment. This was the inevitable culmination of months of deliberate, targeted harassment against the Ahmed Cortez family specifically because they didn't fit the defendant's narrow, bigoted vision of who belonged in Pinewood Grove. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Rollins, slowly removed her glasses and fixed Linda with a stare that could freeze fire itself. Ms. Hutcherson, she said, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom like a blade, I've presided over thousands of cases throughout my long career, but very few have disturbed me as profoundly and personally as this one. You were entrusted with a position of community leadership and authority, and you deliberately weaponized it against vulnerable families. You didn't just violate laws, you violated a family's most fundamental right to safety and security in their own home. You endangered an infant, a completely helpless child who depended entirely on adults to protect her from harm. Judge Rollins sentenced Linda to 2 full years in state prison, with an additional 3 years of supervised probation. The courtroom erupted, gasps, shocked murmurs, one person actually applauding before being immediately shushed by the bailiff. But even then, Linda showed absolutely no remorse. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, she twisted back violently and hissed directly at us with pure venom, "You've completely destroyed this perfect community. I genuinely hope you're satisfied with yourselves." The criminal case was only the beginning of our fight. Marcus Webb filed an extensive civil lawsuit against both Linda personally and the entire Pinewood Grove HOA board. They knew about her escalating behavior for years and did absolutely nothing, he explained grimly. That's institutional complicity and negligence. Legal discovery revealed absolutely damning evidence. Emails showing board members actually laughing about Linda's harassment tactics, meeting minutes where legitimate complaints against Linda were dismissed without any investigation. A clear paper trail of selective enforcement, white families receiving polite, courtesy warnings, for identical violations that earned minority families immediate maximum fines. One particular email, from board member Thomas Richardson directly to Linda, made me physically ill when Marcus showed it to us. "Keep pushing the Cortez family hard. Eventually they'll get the message and move somewhere more appropriate for their kind. The neighborhood thanks you for your service." The civil lawsuit sought substantial damages for severe emotional distress, systematic harassment, and clear civil rights violations. But more importantly, it demanded sweeping structural changes to the HOA's entire governance, new elected leadership, mandatory oversight committees, and explicit, enforceable anti-discrimination policies with real consequences. The case was ultimately settled out of court 8 months later. The HOA paid $450,000 in damages, money that would secure Emma's entire college fund and then some, and agreed to completely dissolve the existing board structure. They implemented entirely new bylaws requiring transparency, strictly limiting presidential power, and creating a paid resident ombudsman position to handle complaints. Linda, upon her eventual release from prison, would be permanently banned from any HOA leadership position anywhere in the state. Her lawyer fought it desperately, claiming it was excessive and unconstitutional, but Judge Rollins firmly upheld the restriction during the final settlement hearing. "You had power and you catastrophically abused it," the judge told Linda coldly. "You don't ever get that power back. That's the consequence of your choices." Our neighborhood had genuinely transformed beyond recognition. New elected leadership brought actual community spirit to Pinewood Grove. The annual Fall Festival, previously a stiff, formal affair with strict rules, became a joyful celebration where children ran freely through fallen leaves and families eagerly shared food from dozens of different cultures. Daniel's biryani was always a massive hit. The Patel's gorgeous Diwali lights were officially approved and celebrated. Patricia Morrison organized a real neighborhood watch program that actually watched out for each other, not against imagined threats. Emma took her first wobbly steps in our backyard, giggling with pure joy as she toddled toward the fountain Linda had once tried to force us to remove. The peaceful sound of running water mixed beautifully with wind chimes, Abuela's precious wind chimes, rehung with pride and love on our front porch where they belonged. We kept the crib in Emma's room, though we'd eventually moved it slightly away from the wall. Not because of any regulation, but simply because Emma was getting bigger and more active, and it made practical sense. The delicate mobile still hung above it, glass butterflies catching afternoon light and casting rainbow shadows. Sometimes, when Emma slept peacefully and the house was beautifully quiet, I thought about that terrible night. The raw terror, the burning rage, the sickening violation of our safety. But I also thought about everything that came after, the neighbors who finally found their courage, the systems that changed, the community that learned to actually care for all its members. Linda was released from prison after 18 months for good behavior. She moved to a different state entirely, and I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she lived alone, completely cut off from the community she'd once controlled with an iron fist. I didn't feel triumph at that news. Just profound sadness, for the waste of it all, for the years she'd spent carefully nurturing hate instead of community, for all the relationships she'd destroyed including her own. One peaceful evening, as I rocked Emma to sleep in the nursery, Daniel appeared quietly in the doorway with his phone. "You need to see this immediately," he whispered, his eyes wide. It was a breaking news article. Former HOA presidents across the country face criminal charges after Pinewood Grove case sparks nationwide investigation. Our case had triggered something much bigger than we'd ever imagined. Other families had found courage to come forward with similar stories, HOA leaders systematically abusing power, deliberately targeting minorities, using covenants as weapons against families who were different. Active investigations were now underway in 17 states. "We did that," Daniel said softly, wonder filling his voice. "Emma did that. Our baby changed things." I looked down at our daughter, nearly asleep in my arms, her small fist curled trustingly against my chest. She would never remember the night Linda broke in, would never consciously know the fear we'd felt. But she would grow up in a community that had learned, through pain and struggle, to be genuinely better. "Yeah," I whispered back, kissing Emma's forehead gently. She really did. The baby monitor sat on the dresser, its screen showing Emma's crib from multiple angles. We'd upgraded the entire system, added cameras, installed better locks. But more than security equipment, we'd built something infinitely stronger, a real community that actually watched over each other with love instead of suspicion. Emma stirred slightly, making those small sounds that meant she was dreaming. I wondered what babies dreamed about. Warm milk, safe arms, the beautiful butterflies dancing above her crib. Whatever it was, I hoped it was peaceful. She deserved peace. We all did. And in Pinewood Grove, finally, we'd found it. Emma bounded through the front door, her butterfly backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Mama! Guess what happened at school today? I looked up from where I was preparing dinner, smiling at my now 5-year-old daughter. She'd grown so much, tall for her age, with Daniel's warm brown eyes and my dark curls that refused to be tamed. What happened, baby? Mrs. Patterson told us about community helpers. And I said my mama and papa are community helpers because they made our neighborhood better. Her face glowed with pride. Is that true? Did you really? Daniel appeared from his home office, having heard the conversation. He knelt down to Emma's level. We did, Mija. But you helped too. How? I was just a baby. Sometimes, I said softly, joining them, the smallest people make the biggest difference. You reminded everyone what's really important, taking care of each other. Emma processed this seriously, then nodded. Like how Ms. Patricia brings us cookies, and Mr. Henderson lets me help with his garden, and the Patels taught me to make rangoli. Exactly like that, Daniel confirmed. Later that evening, after Emma was asleep, Daniel and I stood on our porch. The copper wind chimes sang their gentle song, Abuela's Legacy, now joined by new chimes Emma had picked out herself at a craft fair. The neighborhood was peaceful, lights glowing warmly in windows, the sound of friendly conversations drifting on the breeze. Patricia walked by with her granddaughter, waving. The Hendersons were hosting a barbecue, we could smell the delicious food and hear laughter. The Patel's Diwali lights twinkled year-round now, a beautiful reminder of how diverse traditions enriched everyone. Do you ever think about her? Daniel asked quietly. I knew he meant Linda. Sometimes. I heard she tried to volunteer at a community center in her new city. They rejected her after the background check. Good. His voice was firm. Some people shouldn't have power over others. I don't hate her anymore, I admitted. I just feel empty about it. She had so many chances to choose differently. To be kind instead of cruel. To build community instead of walls. That was her choice. Not ours. Daniel wrapped his arm around me. We chose to stay. To fight. To make this place what it should have been all along. Inside, the baby monitor showed Emma sleeping peacefully, her butterfly nightlight casting gentle shadows. The crib was long gone, replaced by a big girl bed with a canopy covered in stars. But the glass butterflies still hung above her, my mother's final gift still watching over her granddaughter. We did good, I whispered. We did, Daniel agreed. And Emma's going to grow up knowing that when you see injustice, you stand up. When you see hate, you fight it with community. When someone tries to make you feel like you don't belong, you prove them wrong by belonging so hard they can't ignore it. A car pulled up across the street, new neighbors, a young family moving in. I watched as Patricia immediately walked over with a welcome basket, as the Patels emerged with food, as the Hendersons offered to help unload. This was Pinewood Grove now. Not perfect, but genuinely trying. Not colorblind, but celebrating color. Not ruled by fear, but built on actual community. The doorbell rang. It was Marcus Webb, our lawyer who'd become a dear friend. Hope I'm not interrupting. I was in the neighborhood and wanted to drop this off. He handed us a legal document. The State Bar Association is using your case in ethics training. Teaching lawyers about systemic discrimination and civil rights. Really? My eyes widened. Your case changed more than just this neighborhood, Sarah. It changed how HOAs are regulated statewide. It gave courage to families in other states to speak up. It reminded people that institutions meant to serve communities can't be allowed to become weapons against them. After Marcus left, Daniel and I sat on our porch swing, the same swing Linda had once tried to cite us for because it was 3 inches over the regulation width. Emma asked me yesterday if people are born mean or if they choose it, Daniel said. What did you tell her? I told her that hurt people sometimes hurt others. That fear makes people cruel. But that kindness is always a choice, and the brave choice. He paused. Then she asked if the lady who scared her when she was a baby ever learned to choose kindness. And I told her I hoped so. That it's never too late to choose differently. But that if someone doesn't want to change, we can't force them, we can only make sure they can't hurt anyone else. The wind chimes sang louder, a sudden gust carrying autumn leaves across our lawn. Somewhere in another state, Linda Hutcherson was living with her choices. Here, we were living with ours. And our choice, to fight, to build something better, had created ripples far beyond what we'd ever imagined that terrifying night when we'd found a stranger shaking our baby's crib. Emma was safe. Our community was healing. And every family that came after us would benefit from the stand we'd taken. That was worth everything. Come on, I said, standing and pulling Daniel up with me. Let's check on Emma one more time, then get some sleep. Tomorrow's the neighborhood fall festival, and she's so excited to help set up. We walked inside together, leaving the porch light on, a beacon of welcome, not warning. Because that's what homes should be. That's what communities should be. Places where everyone belongs. Where babies sleep safely. Where wind chimes sing without permission. Where the only rules that matter are kindness, respect, and love.